Don't say autistic when you mean asshole. This video outlines the phenomenon where people use autistic or on the spectrum as an insult. We'll pull it apart and break down 3 reasons why that's not okay, and look at a couple of ways to help you call it out if you hear it. Hi everyone, Paul Micallef here from Autism from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this phenomenon of people using autistic or on the spectrum when they really just mean asshole. They really just mean someone who they personally find difficult to deal with. And they're essentially equating being autistic to being stubborn, rude, uncooperative, uncommunicative, and just generally difficult to work with. So you probably already get a sense that that's problematic for several reasons, but it's not always easy to put words around that and explain it to others. So here are 3 key reasons that I've identified. Number 1, being autistic is an identity and a culture. You can't use my identity and my culture as a slur pointing out what you don't like in someone else and equating me with those negative attributes. I mean, imagine if people started going around saying, that's so Australian, when what they meant is that's so stupid, or that's so dumb. Or if instead of arrogant, people said, oh, you're such a dancer, or you're such a mechanic, or you're such a school teacher. Like, whatever it is, whatever the identity is, it's not up for grabs in terms of using it as a derogatory term. Within the autistic community, we will occasionally use the phrase, oh, that's so autistic. And what we generally mean by that is that's so weird and interesting and quirky and unconventional and cool, and I love it because it's me and it's us and it kind of represents us and our neurodiversity. So we use that to describe ourselves, and it's usually in a positive way. So someone outside the community using it as a derogatory term is not okay. Number 2, we're not all on the spectrum somewhere. Someone is not a little bit autistic. So saying that this person is so autistic or a little bit on the spectrum just doesn't really make sense. It's a significant point of confusion though, so I actually made an entire video dedicated to looking at that question. My favorite way to explain it is that having some autistic traits doesn't make you a little bit autistic, just like being sad sometimes doesn't make you a little bit clinically depressed. When we start calling people a little bit autistic, we're using autism to mean the trait that you're seeing in that person that is leading you to think that they're a little bit autistic. So it's moving away from autism as an identity and culture and as an entire way of being and a way of experiencing the world, and it's reducing that to a handful of stereotypical traits. And usually when we reduce things to a handful of traits, we usually pick the negative things like being stubborn or arrogant or rude or blunt or any of these other negative things that are so easy to attribute to autism. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about educating people in this space is because to realize you're autistic and to realize that there's been a reason why it's been hard to connect with people and why you haven't felt people have understood you your whole life, to have a reason for that is extremely validating, and I don't want to see that taken away by flippant phrases like, aren't we all a little bit autistic? What does that even mean anyway? And the third reason is this has nothing to do with autism. If you're calling someone else autistic as an insult, saying that they're hard to work with or that they're a bit difficult, then that is essentially your personal or professional conflict with another person. It has nothing to do with autism. You might be having a hard time with them, and from their perspective, you're probably just as bad. Conflict and misunderstanding and frustration at trying to work with someone else who sees things differently from you, that happens all the time. It has nothing to do with autism, so please leave my identity and culture out of it. In fact, my recommendation in that situation is to learn some emotional intelligence skills. Handling conflict is a skill that can be learned, just like communication is a skill that can be learned. In fact, because I'm autistic and had to learn this the hard way with a neurotypical population that expected me to conform to their norms, and I had to try and learn how to work with that, I've written an entire emotional intelligence course specifically to help people learn those skills. So instead of projecting your problem onto the other person, calling them difficult and them autistic, I highly recommend looking at your contribution to the problem and going down the personal development approach instead. So we've looked at those 3 reasons. Don't use my culture as a derogatory term. We are not all on the spectrum somewhere, so you can't be a little bit autistic. And finally, this is about managing personal conflict and has nothing to do with autism. So now we're clear and can articulate a few reasons why we don't want to tolerate this kind of behaviour. What can you do when you hear it to call it out and help people be more respectful? Well, number 1, the phrase I like is, don't say autistic when you mean asshole. Usually when someone is using autism as a derogatory term, there's kind of a level of frustration. Matching their level of frustration with a word like asshole kind of validates their experience and kind of redirects that frustration into a more appropriate place. Secondly, a lot of people are ignorant around what it means to be autistic or on the spectrum or anything like that. So this is a good opportunity to educate about that. We're not all on the spectrum. Say what you mean. This person is hard to get along with. And again, I really like this phrase, say what you mean, because it's not shutting the other person down, but it is strongly redirecting them into something more appropriate. So they are my tips on a few ways of how to respond if someone is using autistic or on the spectrum as a derogatory term, or just to vent their frustration with another person. I'm interested to hear if you've observed this phenomenon as well. Do people in your life, or I find it's especially in workplaces, sometimes use autistic to mean that one colleague that I find really challenging to work with. So if that's your experience or if you've seen other things, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I'll see you next week.